and Elise has been doing a bunch of research about wood foundations to try and save like a shitload of money on the cost of pouring a foundation. Yeah, so she was like deep into the internet research and spent like 2 hours last night talking to this very strange guy who's like super into it.
Got like a face.
I was like, can we please eat dinner? Like, it is 8 p.m. Hang up on this man. Hopefully it will be done this year. But starting in like May, I think. So we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's like, well, it will feel more real when they're like visual cues, you know. Right now it's just a lot of like
Wood foundation phone calls.
yeah, exactly. Have you guys been having a good winter so far?
We have been. Just going back to my family's house for a while over holiday.
Where's that at?
And I grew up in Pittsburgh.
Okay.
There. They came back here. Now a lot across the street.
Nice.
Okay. We're about to leave.
All right, time is 5:30, so we'll get started. This is the Cortez City Council work session / special meeting. Today's Tuesday, January 23rd, 2024, and the time is 5:30 p.m. I'd like to call this meeting to order, and we're going to start with a joint meeting with City Council and the Planning and Zoning Commission, and Jen Gardner and McKayla Dunfey from Logan Simpson to discuss the land use code progress. All right.
Hello. Sorry, we were trying to figure out some technology over here. Let me get this in the right place. All right. Cool. Thanks for having us again. It's been a couple months since we've been here with you all, and we've been hard at work, as you've noticed from the Module 1 documents that you've been reviewing. So primarily tonight, we want to just give you a quick recap of the process. I know there's a couple of new faces, I believe, around the table. So a quick overview of the process, where we're at in that process, an overview of what's included in Module 1. We're going to walk through some of the details of some of the highlights of the changes in Module 1, then open it up for some questions and discussion from you all on any questions you have on what we're going over or what you've read already in the Conveyo link that we sent out. And then we'll just give a really quick overview of what's to come with Module 2. We did just kick off Module 2 with our advisory committee last night, briefly. We went over some housekeeping on Module 1, a few additional questions that we had on some of the Module 1 topics, and then started to kind of dive into a couple of topics in Module 2 so we can start getting our heads around that and start drafting that while you're all reviewing Module 1. So just a reminder of our schedule here. We're in kind of step 3 of this schedule, the drafting phase. As you'll remember, we had a foundation phase, which included listening sessions with the community and some joint work sessions to get our heads into what was working and what wasn't with your current code, which resulted in the assessment report, which is part of phase 2 there. And then the assessment report is guiding our drafting. So as we're drafting these modules, we're looking back on the assessment report on the items and topics that we had identified that needed to be addressed. Once we're through writing all of the modules, then we'll move through the adoption process. So just a reminder of what's in each of the modules. Module 1 includes zone district regulations, general provisions, and use standards. And that's what we have out for review right now with you all. Module 2 will include subdivision standards, site development standards, and historic preservation. I'll go over that at the end of the meeting, kind of give you a little bit of an overview of really what's included in all of those sections. And then Module 3 will wrap it up with application procedures, floodplain regulations, final pass through the definitions, and any of the appendices. We are updating definitions as we go. A huge component of Module 1 was looking at all the use definitions, filling in new use definitions, definitions where there were none, and starting to really define all the different housing types which are part of the uses. So we have started to make up a pretty good progress into the definitions as we go. As we move into Module 2, anything relevant to subdivisions or site development standards, we'll address those definitions as we go as well. So when we get to that last phase, it's kind of just any other definitions that need to be addressed, any cleanup, anything we need to add. Guess I already went through the modules. There's a duplicate slide in there. So Module 1, Chapter 1. So Module 1 includes two basic chapters. It's Chapter 1 and Chapter 3. Chapter 1 is our general provisions. Chapter 3 is the zone district and use standards. Chapter 2 is definitions. So we're, as I said before, kind of working in Chapter 2 a little bit. We've pulled a lot of information out of Chapter 2 into Chapter 3, and I'll describe that in a minute. So kind of the three basic things that we've done with Chapter 1 are some minor reorganization and language cleanup. Anywhere that there's really lengthy language or language that you read over and over and say, I still don't know what that means, we've tried to clean that up a little bit, simplify some of that throughout. We've addressed quite a bit of changes to the non-conforming provisions and one kind of major change to the enforcement and penalties section. So the minor organization and cleanup, and this will be reflected in all of the different chapters. Actually, one bullet point that's not on here, we've kind of renumbered some of the code. Right now, your numbering goes Chapter 1, and then I think it's like 1.01, and then ABC. We've kind of changed that numbering to add another subheader, kind of level of header in there to help organize some of the sections, specifically our zoning and use chapter. It really helped kind of categorize our zoning and our uses to add that additional level of header. So if you see that in there, you'll see if you were to compare to your existing code, there's definitely a little shift in the organization just on the numbering, but a lot of that language remains the same, just kind of in a different pattern. But we are adding an organization and purpose section to the beginning of all of your chapters, so you can go to that, the very first page of the chapter and get a little small table of contents for what's in that chapter. So that's what the organization is, and then a purpose statement for each of these chapters. We've retitled authority and applicability to authority and jurisdiction. And then the severability language was at the very end of Chapter 1, and we've moved it up under kind of a subheader of general provisions or general requirements in that general provisions to bring it right up front, and we've simplified that statement as well. So that's kind of the organization and general language cleanup in Chapter 1. Moving into the non-conforming provisions, this is where we've done the bulk of the work in Chapter 1. We've added a purpose statement for clarification, reorganized some of the existing language into specific categories for non-conforming structures, non-conforming uses, and non-conforming signs. We've added some language at the beginning to allow for a certificate of legal nonconformity. So what this is when this code is adopted, inevitably there will be properties that now are left non-conforming. And actually we're hoping with some of the changes proposed that we're going to bring a lot of your non-conforming lots and structures into conformance with some of the changes. So that's a great thing to kind of reduce some of the nonconformities, but you will be left with some nonconformities. If a property knows that their use or their structure is nonconforming, maybe it was built many, many years ago, they just know that they've compared it to the code, they're very well aware that it's not conforming with the current code, they can come in and apply for, we're going to help staff develop a form or some sort of certificate where they can come in and say, we're aware that we have a legal nonconformity, and then the city can track that. So then staff has a certificate that this particular structure is legally nonconforming. When they come in for applications for anything in the future, they know within kind of the parameters of where they can work. It'll help track a little bit better. It's not required, it's an optional, it's an opt-in kind of situation. So if you're aware that you have this situation, you know you may need to make changes to your building in the future, then that's a good kind of path forward. Yes?
I have a question, because in it says you have to apply for that within 365 days of you becoming non-conforming. How do I know that my property is non-conforming, and is that 365 days really a drop-dead thing if I don't know about it?
No, it's an encouraged situation anyway, and it would be, most of the time it's people who are aware that they're non-conforming. Great example would be a single-family residential structure in your CBD area where you would know, I'm not a business, I'm a single-family residence. Maybe you're well aware that you've been operating as a single-family residence in the CBD. Totally allowed, don't need to make any changes to that, but just making it, adding that extra layer in of protection to say, I know I'm a legal nonconformity, and I can continue to operate. You don't have to, though. It's just kind of to help build that catalog so that staff doesn't have to do quite as much research if you were to come in and then, looking back into ownership and previous applications or situations. So I thought we removed the 365 days, though, so I don't think that's in there anymore in the new.
Because in the copy we were sent, it did say 365.
Yeah.
Can you repeat that, please?
I say in the copy we were sent for Planning Commission, the 365 was still there.
Okay, great. We'll take a look at that, because we had talked about taking that out or leaving that in, so. Does anyone have any strong opinions about that? I mean, I think if it's an opt-in situation, it's not necessarily time sensitive. It's just, as you're aware of your legal nonconformity, it is helpful all the way around to apply for that certificate.
I did have a question. Is that, so my question was also about that, the 365 day where it becomes, it kind of places a burden on the property owner related to it. And I was wondering if that non-conforming status, is that limited to a non-conforming use, or would that also be if you have a non-conforming setbacks or anything like that?
All of the above.
Okay. I think any requirement to have property owners evaluate the new code and see if their property fits the new code that's been overlaid on top of it, I just don't think that would be appropriate.
Great. Yeah, I think that 365 days, we had the same conversation with staff, that if we're not requiring it, then we probably do not need a time frame. It's just an optional kind of, optional option? You get the point.
So just to clarify, so a
Yeah.
property owner wouldn't be losing any of their rights
Nope.
if they didn't apply for that?
No, absolutely. It just kind of helps. It helps if they're aware of it, like you said, no one's going to go reading through the code and say, oh, now my property is now, non-conforming. It's mostly, there's going to be a handful of folks that are aware and really, maybe already have ideas for some sort of future enhancements or development in mind, and that's probably the few people that would opt into this in the first place. Yeah.
You mentioned that you changed it, or you took out the 365. Has any
Yeah.
other part of that language changed, and do you have it that you can share with us so that we're aware?
Yeah, let me pull that up. Mostly, we have removed language that was confusing or unnecessary. So here's the non-conforming status. Sorry, it's a little jumpy. So this is the new language you can see, and well, it's red on my screen. It looks kind of purple on your screen. So this is the new language that we've added, and you're right. I think we should make it bigger. Sure. I mean, you can't read that? Is that getting bigger? Oh, good. So this is the new language. And you can see below there was some additional language that was retained from your current code, which just establishes what a non-conforming status is.
Robert, are you saying you don't want the burden on the property owner, or just?
Well, I mean, I certainly wouldn't want it to where you lose the right to a non-conforming property because you didn't file a form with the city. Yeah.
Is there something we could do to make it more clear? Because it is that the owner may within, and we can take that out, may submit the request. So maybe this initial language is too strong, saying the
Yeah.
burden of, so maybe we could just take that out and this could be the language. Or
I'm thinking
soften
of
that
an
in some
incident.
fashion.
I'm thinking of an incident we had recently, or at least in my tenure, where someone bought a home in town and the addition to the home encroached on city sidewalks. She was not aware of that, and so then she had to get an exemption, and she would not be aware of it to file it within time. So I agree with Robert, that burden should not be on the homeowner, property
Okay.
owner.
What's the threshold on renovation that where then you have to come into compliance? Like if you were on a property that didn't allow an ADU, but it had one, and you wanted to replace it, could you do that?
Oh, that's a good one. So the language in here right now speaks to if a structure is destroyed by a natural hazard. Originally said fire. We've opened that to natural hazards, but now I think we might need to define that even a little bit further, what could be a natural hazard. Right now, the language states that if the structure is completely obliterated by a natural hazard, you can rebuild within the confines, of the nonconformity if it doesn't meet setbacks or whatever the situation is. But if any other disaster should occur, that you can only rebuild if it's under 50% is damaged or destroyed. So in that situation, I'd have to kind of think through that a little bit. ADUs come up a lot with regards to converting garages, say an old detached garage that might not have sufficient setbacks. Honestly, a lot of times they don't have sufficient structural integrity either, but say it does, but it's only 2 feet off the property line, so it wouldn't meet the setback. A lot of communities have struggled with that with ADUs, converting the ADU, because now you'd be adding a new use to a nonconformity, and that technically is not allowed. Currently in the language. So if that's something you want to entertain or look at, we can look into that. But
I guess I didn't know if it'd be worth like listing the benefits then of getting on
Sure.
this list, like for data purposes. And then so if you go to get a permit, you already have kind of a baseline and knowing like how many changes you can make or.
right.
That's what I was thinking too, is why would they want to go do this?
Yeah.
Would probably be a question that comes up.
Yeah. So let's say, for example, I have an older home that I didn't know was non-conforming. Maybe it's too tall. Maybe it encroaches in the setbacks. We'll just go with, I kind of like this ADU. I'm going to kind of play this out. So maybe I have a garage at the back of my house, and I really want to convert it into an ADU, but I don't know that it's non-conforming. So then I come in to the planning staff and I say, I'd like to do this. That's when I would be alerted, oh, it's a non-conforming structure, and this is all that you can do with it. At that point, I would have the option to say, okay, well, now that I know that it's a legal nonconformity, and they would say, oh, you could sign a certificate, so now you know that you have this legal nonconformity. So then in the future, you just, it's easy for them to pull and you to know where you're at. So I don't know, that's just one that I could think of as, the folks that don't know, that come in and propose some option, some alternative, and then find out that they're a nonconformity. It could be a quick and simple process for staff to start to develop kind of a database. But I like removing the burden language, because in this situation, you're finding out through investigation, and then it's kind of developing that list over time. So maybe that's more, I think that's more the intent of it.
Yeah, it feels like it could be more positively reframed. 'Cause,
Right, agreed.
Like, right now, it feels like they're being punished for not knowing that there is a
Right.
nonconformity and that they didn't know, so they didn't take the action. So,
Exactly.
yeah, and I
I like
think
that, yeah.
there's a more welcoming approach for the city to be like, oh, did you know this? Would you like to be added to the registry for this or
Right.
whatever?
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I agree. I would like it to be more positive language that incentivizes people to come in and get on the non-conforming list to help the city and help themselves. And also reading the 365 days, to me, I think that might freak a lot of people out in
Right.
this town right now, because they might be looking out their window at their outbuildings and stuff and thinking like, oh no,
Right.
is somebody coming for me? But, so, yeah, I like the idea of changing the view of it.
Good.
This might be a question for staff, but how many times could we anticipate that something like this might come up? Is this a fairly common occurrence?
Having people come in and realize that they have a nonconformity.
There are quite a bit of nonconformities throughout the city. Usually they're pretty minor. We're not looking for them. So this idea is that they just get on the record and you don't have to, staff doesn't have to research it every time. Like, when was the house built? Okay, now I gotta look at the code and find out. So that's all really the idea here, is make it simpler for everyone in the future.
And it doesn't cost the public anything to come get on the
No.
list, correct?
No.
Okay.
Sometimes these are those times that I wish code could just be a little looser and you could say, if you would like to, you can come be on this list. So we'll try to soften it as much as possible to get that across. But I like that the idea of it being welcoming and positive. That's good.
I still haven't seen where it's going to benefit the citizen. Excuse me. He already knows it's non-conforming. That's why he came in, to register it. This is helping the city, but how is it helping the citizen?
I would say it probably is helping the city more than the citizen. It could help them with, insurance.
So that they can say, this is legal, it's non-conforming.
Right.
And that would be really nice for us to know, because we're going to have, those people are going to ask us that question. And we want to be able to say, well, the reason that we'd like you to register, you don't have to, is because it'll help with your insurance and things of this nature. If we don't have that knowledge, it's pretty hard to convince somebody to do something that they have no benefit
Right.
with.
Absolutely. Good. Any other thoughts on this one?
I've got one comment.
Yeah.
At our committee meeting last night, somebody brought up a situation where a building permit was issued and it wasn't certain whether or not the property was non-conforming. And I think to avoid that situation, it would be helpful for the city to be proactive in cataloging all of these non-conforming lots so that when somebody comes in for a development approval or a building permit, staff will know there'll be a red flag that pops up so that they can process that. And I guess to do that, it would place the burden on staff to do the research and find out what the level of conformance is on every lot, but it might be worth it in the long run so that we don't have errors and allow somebody to rebuild if they weren't allowed to under the code.
I think another benefit to the citizen too is that, as we know on P&Z, there's a lot of time involved in this stuff. And so if the certificate's done, the research is done ahead of time, and they want to come before either Board of Adjustments or Planning and Zoning for a variance, it's going to go a lot faster.
Yeah, thanks for that. I was thinking the same thing when we were talking about benefits earlier, as if you were trying to do some form of application, having the certificate could potentially shorten that investigation is already complete. So, yeah. Good. All right. Well, we have...
Excuse me.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have something very picky, it's high school teacher grading papers. So in several places in this document, you refer to, for say, a one-year period. Sometimes it says 1 year, sometimes it says 12 months. In this case, it says 365. Do you want to make that standardized throughout? Because like, when I read 1 year, I said, well, just the previous paragraph, it said 12 months. So
Okay.
just a picky, thank you.
No, I appreciate the pickies too. That's good. All right. In the maintenance and repairs section, we did just clarify that, any minor maintenance can actually is encouraged to take place on a non-conforming structure because, otherwise it would cease to exist. So we want to keep it going. And then abandonment, we did change from 6 months to 12 months. So if a use or a structure, and typically you see this more in a commercial setting than a residential setting where a business goes out of business or leaves or whatnot, and say it's in a non-conforming use in the zone district or a non-conforming structure. The point of this is once they have vacated that building for 12, beyond 12 months, it becomes abandoned, and then it is no longer be able to be used for that non-conforming use or structure. So it would need to come into conformance. The reason we changed it to 12 months is because 6 months oftentimes is, you might just fall in hard times and be able to get your feet back under you or something. So giving a little bit more time to truly call it abandoned or a vacated use.
I had some questions about that abandonment, about that abandonment issue. So is the abandonment limited to the use, or would you be abandoning any of the non-conforming along setbacks, anything else?
Any of the nonconformities. So if there is a nonconformity on that site and they abandon it for longer than 12 months, then it would have to come into conformance with.
So if there were a house, and I'm thinking more in the residential side than in the commercial side, because the commercial side makes a lot of sense to me. But on the residential side, if there were a house and there were some kind of change of ownership through a death in the family or something, it sits for a year, but it's on an old lot, it doesn't meet the setbacks, is that house now unusable? You have to,
That's a good one.
Yeah, that's my concern there, is that if you're abandoning not the use, but the non-conforming things that are not changeable, like if a house is on a smaller lot, you just can't do anything about it. Where you're going to bulldoze it and build another one? That would be my concern with that.
I think that's a good point of clarification, and just kind of piecing together the whole concept. We might want to add an exemption for something like that, because I would not see that. They're not changing the use, they're not changing the structure in any way. So I would think they could continue to use, once they do reestablish themselves or a new family comes in, they wouldn't need to make any changes to that structure. It would just be if they were to pull a permit to do anything else, that they would have to come into conformance. But in a residential construct, I would say we have language elsewhere that says you can kind of rebuild within the confines of the nonconformity, so I don't want to cause a conflict there. So,
Could we reduce it to just the use then?
we could, yeah.
I would definitely be more comfortable with just the use than, yeah.
And that's really the intent of it as we're talking through scenarios. I think that makes most sense. We did add a stipulation that parking would be exempt from this. An example would be, say you have a structure, the use is, trying to think, we've had some examples of like the Thai restaurant, when it changed hands or something, and now the parking requirement for a restaurant is a lot more than the parking that they have available, but it was a good use and it made sense for that area, so that's why we've added that parking exemption. So if you're kind of in that non-conforming category, you've been there for a long time, it's been used as a commercial business for many, many years. It's just that that use type changed that required additional parking, but it was deemed as a good use for the area. Then let's let them come in and not have to add more parking. So that's why that was added. And I think you're going to have a few situations like that over the years.
So say you're in like the commercial district and it is a house and you do want to convert it to a business, do you have to meet the parking requirements? If that's bringing it into into compliance, or, but it's not on the main street. Because I don't know where we kind of allow no parking, if that's just on Main Street or if it's the central business.
Central Business District, I
It's
think.
the whole
Okay, so
the whole
that
central
goes down
business
to
district. Yeah.
first, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see it happening in the central business district, but parking is fairly exempt there. Neighborhood business, maybe, if a use came in the neighborhood business area that required more parking than was available, that might be another area that you could see that in. All right. I've totally abandoned the PowerPoint. We'll go back to that in a minute. You can see all of our messy red lines this way. So non-conforming use, you can see this language was the language that moved up to that status that we were just talking about, the 365 days. So that was a remnant of your existing code that we'll fix. We've added some new language in here. Most of the non-conforming use and non-conforming structure sections, as you'll see in here, are brand new language. Some of it's very similar to the language you had. We just kind of restructured it, and in the end, it kind of just wrote itself out in a little bit different format. So the structures, I don't know if there's any thoughts on the structure section, but we all feel like there's maybe one more refinement of this section that still feels like there might be just a little too much verbiage in there that could be condensed a little bit further. So I don't know if there's any specific thoughts in that section. And are we good with the natural disaster taking, once if the entire structure is taken down by a natural disaster, they can rebuild, and only 50% if it's destroyed by other methods or however that happens? Or do we want to allow all structures to rebuild within the nonconformity as long as they don't exceed the nonconformity? That's kind of one question we've tossed around a little bit. If we need to have that 50% threshold, because it does get a little tricky, what if I accidentally start a fire in my house? Is that considered a natural disaster, or was that just bad use of oils mixed with water in my kitchen? Any thoughts on that?
I guess, are you asking, like, if something happens to someone's house, they can build it on that same footprint
Right.
and still be non-conforming?
Yep.
I think so. I mean,
Like, I guess I'm thinking of like maybe historical structures, or I don't know, like things that there's a value to it being built in the same design, in the same way that, or like this, for the same use or whatnot. I mean, if it's a non-natural disaster, it could have been somebody else that caused the destruction. So I'm torn.
Yeah, I'm tossing this back and forth because I'm thinking on the other side, if in that way we're basically, if we say you can rebuild any nonconformity 100% no matter how it was destroyed, then we're basically saying every nonconformity in the city right now is grandfathered in and can be rebuilt at any time. But is that a bad thing?
I don't know that that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We actually talked about this last night, and we went through a lot of scenarios, and one of them be, well, I want to rebuild my house, but it's non-conforming, but if I like this match and burn the house down, then I can rebuild it non-conforming. And if we grandfather them in, that could be, it could happen. Whether it would or not, who knows? But we did discuss it last night, and I don't know that we ever came to a conclusion.
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
It's tricky. Yeah, I'm sitting here vacillating.
Well, and we have a lot of old houses with old infrastructure, you know, electric, and they're at risk, so it'd be kind of unfair to not let them, like, rebuild. I don't know.
Right.
I'm thinking about the goal to, if the goal of the code is, a lot of it is forward thinking and to handle some of these past things, but, and to promote safety.
I think to follow up on what we talked about last night, we need a definition of natural causes or
Right.
the cause of the destruction.
Yep.
It just needs to be more clear.
And Katrina, can you remind us if a residence burns down for what, or, you know, is destroyed entirely, do they have to rebuild to the new building code regardless? Or would we need to
Yes.
put that in here?
They do.
Okay.
From an insurance standpoint. If
Okay.
they don't have insurance, they can do whatever they want. But I don't know that all companies are the same, but we allow for additional payout to
Okay.
the customer to bring the new structure to code.
Because that would be my only concern. I really think we're going to be removing a lot of, I know we're going to be removing a lot of the nonconformities with our new lot size dimensions. But say you do have a home that encroaches in the setback by a foot or something in the side yard setback, or, you know, it's just very minor nonconformity, but the interior is not up to code. It would be great if they could at least build it back to, you know, for health, safety, and welfare, back to the newer building code, even if they were 1 foot over on the setback or something.
Yeah, and I think one thing to remember is not all nonconformities are houses.
Right.
So I think we kind of get it fixed in our mind. The old house with the old lady that's lived there for 50 years, you know, that's one thing, but it may be a tough shed that was remodeled without a building code or something, and it's non-conforming, but it's been there a long time, and they've been operating some semi-legitimate business out of it. And I think if you look at the reasons behind having restrictions for rebuilding, is that the codes generally are geared towards eliminating non-conforming properties, that's the ultimate goal, so that when they fall down, or they need significant repairs, they're not allowed to do that, and they've kind of reached their natural life expectancy, and if they want to rebuild, they got to move to a lot that is conforming. And I guess I would be cautious about including terminology like natural causes, because, you know, fire is the obvious one. If it's a lightning strike, that's a natural cause. If it's arson, that's clearly not a natural cause, but what if you can't prove what the cause was? I mean, I think fire forensics is pretty sophisticated, but they don't always figure out what happened, and I'd hate for the planning staff to have to make calls on whether something was natural causes or not. I think that gets into kind of splitting hairs, and it's almost more subjective, which we try to avoid on these codes. So I guess the more of them that I have seen use the 50% rule, where it doesn't matter what the cause is, if it's destroyed by 51% or more, they can't rebuild. If it's 49% or less, they can rebuild. And I think that's easier to determine than kind of regulating the cause. And we certainly don't want to incentivize people to burn their houses down. So, just my 2 cents worth.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking a lot about, Pat. I'm not really thinking about houses. I'm thinking about a lot of outbuildings and things that might not be in compliance. And if we want to really have those grandfathered forever.
What are our thoughts on the 50%, keeping the 50% threshold, removing the natural disaster situation? Because I'm just thinking through some scenarios in my head. One that came up last night is, what if a car runs into a building? You're not going to be destroying 50% of it, but you may want to rebuild more than just the part that's destroyed, and you would be allowed to at that 50% threshold. So I don't know, since we're kind of not, we're all kind of throwing out some ideas, maybe we run with that for now, remove the natural disaster language, keep the 50%, kind of chew on it a little bit. We've got a couple more bites at this apple, so as you guys think through scenarios before we get to adoption, we can always kind of massage that language further. I think that might be kind of a good middle of the road for the moment. Okay, awesome. Let's see. I think that takes us to our non-conforming signs. No, non-conforming lots. That one's pretty straightforward. We cleaned up some very confusing language in here, so I don't know if anyone had any questions. There was something about combination of lots, but I think it was written backwards, and it took us 5 of us to think through all the scenarios, and finally we came up with something that we think is a bit more simple. I can't even talk tonight. And then our non-conforming signs. So we have one big question for you all. Most of this remains in place, but there's a provision in your current code that was basically, I believe, trying to, specifically looking at billboards, trying to phase them out by 1999. And it is now 2024. So we last night decided we probably should leave this language as is and maybe discuss this in more detail. But I wanted to bring that forward to you all. There are a number of non-conforming billboard signs out there that are still being propped up. And I don't know if we need to change this language or if we just need to leave it in place for now and look at a new provision for that moving forward. I believe we prohibit, in the sign section, we prohibit new billboards. So we've already have that covered, but it's just, do we keep allowing the existing billboards to maintain themselves, prop themselves up, or at some point do we say, if it falls down, you got to leave it down?
I know there's federal regulation regarding billboards, and I just want to make sure we don't run afoul of that to where we have to now pay someone for their billboard that fell down. So I just want to make sure our code matches that.
There's a very recent Supreme Court case that I don't even know if that's been fully decided yet, but we can look into that, and it's regarding billboards.
So are 100% of the non-conforming signs non-conforming because of size? Is that the primary? I mean, are there regulations like it has to be so far away from the front of the building, et cetera, or is it mostly just size?
Do you know?
The only ones I'm aware of are billboards. Our sign regulation size is very, very permissive. So it's hard to imagine but, we haven't gone out there checking. Billboards are pretty nice.
So since this ship has sailed many years ago, we could probably just leave it in there for now, or we could remove it. But it's just kind of a point that we need to make a decision on one way or the other at some point. Cool. Enforcement and penalties. The biggest change here is in this first part. Your current code, and a lot of codes, older codes had misdemeanor as the penalty for zoning codes, and a lot of them are changing to a civil offense. So we've provided some language here. Pat's reviewing it and helping us kind of massage it a little bit further. One of the biggest things is that each violation, once you've received a violation and you're into the fee payment schedule, it's a daily fee. And so we need to make that clear here that this is accruing daily. It's not your first violation is $100 and then, you come up with a new violation. So we just need a little bit more clarification on that. But I wanted to point out that we have made that change from misdemeanor to civil offense, and I'm assuming nobody has any major issues with that. I think it still can elevate to a misdemeanor if they're not, rectifying the situation, so. Yeah.
Is it capped, like a daily fee up to X amount?
Not right now, but that's what we're looking at is, do we need, Pat, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that. Does it get capped at a certain, or does it just continue to perpetuate to a certain?
Yeah, I guess there's two thoughts on the fines. One is, depending on the business, and I'm not sure we have any businesses here that would qualify, but I've seen it where the business calculates the fine, and if it's $300 a day, then they calculate that into the cost of doing business. Obviously, it'd be a pretty high revenue business to take a $300 hit every day, but I've seen it where they just ignore the enforcement effort. And so one of the suggestions that I'm recommending is that we also have remedies for revoking permits and getting injunctive relief from the court, so that we could just go to court and have the court order them to stop. If they violate the court order, the court can find them in contempt and put them in jail. And sometimes that's the only way that you get their attention. Judges don't like their orders to be ignored, so. But the fines, and of course, if whatever the fine is, you got to be able to collect it, and it's not like you just show up at their door and they're going to write you a check. So that usually involves litigation, and liens on the property is one thing that we look at. But I think the enforcement, we've really got to look at that, because it becomes a pretty complicated issue, and the neighbors don't like to hear we're working on it. They want to see results, and so I think we need to really put some teeth in our enforcement language.
So say we cap it though at 10 days. I mean, if people are somehow on a large scale abusing this, then can we just come back and change that? And like eliminate the cap, like can we just try something assuming like good faith for people and not like completely decimate them financially if they can't address it in time?
Or is there a way to?
The issue that you could run into with that is a $300 a day, 10-day cap. That's a $3,000 fine. For a business who just wanted to do what they wanted to do, that might be a parking ticket, and they may just say, well, I'll pay the $3,000 and I don't care. So that would just be one of the concerns there, is that you lose the teeth that Pat is talking about.
But is there a way to stipulate, if we did a cap, that after X amount of days, this would then go to the court, and then X permits or whatever would be revoked, so that it's actually more like, okay, there's a monetary cap, but there's more like teeth in it in the back end?
I had another question too about that next provision, switching to a civil offense. Would we still keep the imprisoned for a period of up to, or would that be then tied to like a judge saying someone's in contempt of court, or would we include that in? I guess, do civil offenses have that authority?
Oh.
Right. I was going to say the same thing. Reading that, we should take that clause out. I think we build up what Pat was talking about. I think put a cap on the fee, and then the next steps. So there's probably 2 or 3 steps that would happen, and then we're taking out all the misdemeanor and imprisonment language. That would be handled by the courts.
Do you have any examples from other cities you've looked at or worked in of caps for things like this?
Yeah, we wrote some language for Teton County, Idaho. It's a county, but similar situation. I don't remember the cap right now off the top of my head, but we did a very similar system to what Pat's talking about. It was a tiered system where it was, I think, $100 a day up to a certain point, and if they were still not remedying the situation, then it got elevated to the next level.
Can you issue a cease and desist order and padlock the property?
I don't know, Pat?
Pat?
Yeah, that would be kind of the injunctive relief. We can revoke permits. Under the building permit, it's called red tagging, so that you lock the doors, they can't operate, that sort of thing. And I think we need a kind of an all-of-the-above approach to some of this, because what works for one type of business or one type of business owner may not work on another one. So, yeah, I think we'll keep working on this one.
Perfect. Does that answer some of the questions? Okay. That takes us to the end of this one. I'm going to switch back over to our PowerPoint. Oh, vested rights is one. There's not much to report on that. We're working with Pat on that one right now. The state statute allows for a 3-year vesting, and a lot of codes roll in some additional language in their regulations just to clarify that and point that out. So we're working with Pat on some language to just make it clear what documents are vested. And I don't know if we have any questions on that at the moment, Pat, or, yeah.
I have one question
Sure.
about that. It says, "The city clerk shall mail a written notice of public hearing to all real property within 300 feet." We recently had an application in P&Z about a clubhouse going to be used for a business, and there were only 2 houses within 300 feet. Is 300 feet magical? I'm thinking 300 yards makes more sense to me, but I don't know if you can address that.
300 feet is magical. I mean, no, 300 feet is typical. I believe there's something in state statute about a minimum distance, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Most jurisdictions do 300 feet, some do 500 feet. Some have the ability to expand that if you're only hitting, say, 2 houses, and they can look at that and say, oh, this is only going to notify 2 people. If we expanded that to 500, we would get more of the impact. It's supposed to be related to the impact of the development or the application.
There was another one where an applicant wanted to change from commercial to industrial, and that also only affected notifying 3 people, I think, within that, and it would seem the neighborhood around there, you'd want to impact more folks.
Right.
Just my thoughts.
All right. Are there any other questions or thoughts on Chapter 1?
I'd just like to say one more thing on the rebuilding.
Sure.
We all like to think that everybody has the best intentions in mind and they all insure their houses and take care of their houses, but they don't. So if a house was to be destroyed because of lack of maintenance or termites or something like that, I think that needs to be addressed somehow. I don't think they should get the same rights as people that are maintaining their house and some catastrophe happens.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts on Chapter 1? You guys did great. That's very, very technical, legal kind of language, so did good getting through that one. Maybe not technical language, but kind of not exciting. Okay. Chapter 2 is what this should say. The 3 main things that we did in, Chapter 3, still part of Module 1. The 3 main items that we've addressed in Chapter 3 are some reorganization, we changed some of the zone district titles, added some descriptions, we'll go into this a little bit more in detail in a minute, updated the dimensional standard tables. We've simplified the PUD standards quite a bit. I think we cut 10 pages out of the code and I'll explain what we did there in a minute. And then the use tables have been kind of updated. We've added some uses, combined some uses, modernized some uses, added definitions for every single use and standards for the ones that were applicable. The other piece of that is I believe the use standards in your current code, it reads zone districts and then you go into use standards and then the use table and then the dimensional. It's kind of jumbled all together. So we've pulled apart all the zoning related provisions are all in one kind of section, and then you go into the uses, so your use standards are combined with your use table and use definitions. So it flows a little bit better now. But getting into the details, Like I said, we've added descriptions to every single zone district. Your current code has a description for residential zone districts, just holistically, a description for commercial districts, but then there weren't individual descriptions for each of the zone districts. So we've worked with our advisory committee, and that was part of what we brought out to the public last October to try to refine and make sure that we were headed in the right direction and describing them appropriately. We have changed everywhere that it said area regulations to dimensional standards. Kind of describes a little bit better what all those setbacks and building height standards are. There was repetitive language in each of these sections. So if you had, you know, the R1 zone district, it would talk very lengthy about the uses and some dimensional standards that were in the table that were being reiterated, and we've cleaned all of that language up and simplified it, and I can show you that in the document here in a minute. Like I said, we relocated the use regulations and added use type definitions along with the standards. So that's kind of our reorganization. I'm going to run through a couple of these, and then we can just actually have discussion as we go, like we have been. And I can toggle back and forth between the document if you guys need to see anything else. But one thing we did want to point out, we have proposed just a slight renaming of a couple of the zone districts. It doesn't change the zone districts. We haven't changed the boundaries, proposed any changes to the boundaries or the intent of these zone districts. After a lot of discussion, we decided that the manufactured home district, which really includes manufactured homes, single-family homes, duplexes, townhomes, it's probably your broadest residential zone district, and rightfully so. It's got a lot of great bones to it and a lot of good opportunity to incorporate some great housing. Like I said, lots of discussion on this one, whether we should rename it or not, and we have landed with a new name called R3 Mixed Residential. So everyone kind of decided that seemed to represent that zone district a little bit better than manufactured home district. Similarly with commercial highway district, just shortening it to commercial, we have our central business district, neighborhood business, and then this is just kind of your general commercial catch-all, because it's not all along the highway. It's mostly on the highway, but not all. And so just having that clarification that all the zone districts that were zoned commercial highway now are just shortening that term to commercial. The residential estate district, oh yeah, go ahead.
If I remember correctly, we have quite a few residential properties in the commercial highway district.
Yep.
Is, I guess, lumping them into the commercial now, were there any differences between the highway district and the straight commercial that would affect these houses?
No, the intent of that district remains the same. So it's still intended to be, the purpose of the district is still the same that it was before. And a lot of the uses are the same. You'll see when you look at the use table, we've tried to refine it a little bit, but for the most part, we've tried to keep the intent of that district. So, residential estate, when we started to dive into looking at a true analysis of what properties were zoned residential estate, there's really a very small handful. I think there was like two properties, and I think two of them were owned by there were four. Two or three were owned by the city that are parkland or near the recreation center. So there's really only one. Actually, I think it's two parcels side by side that are privately owned. So after, again, some good discussion on this one, we've decided let's call that a legacy zone district. So what that means is those properties that are zoned RE can remain zoned RE. They can do everything that they would normally do within the use provisions and the dimensional standards and everything. We just won't allow any new properties to rezone to RE. And we did have quite a bit of discussion on that because there's property probably around the fringe of the city that if it were to annex in, could potentially go to more of a residential estate. Where we landed on this was the residential estate is 1 acre lots or larger, and those really do seem more suited to the county, whereas we're trying within the city to provide a lot more opportunity for housing. So that's where that decision kind of landed on the legacy district. So any questions on these three renamings?
I have a question for staff then, because you said several of the city properties are zoned, or several of the RES zoned are city-owned. You know, long-term, would it be good to just change the zoning on those? Okay.
Yeah.
Add it to the list.
All right, any other questions on that? Okay, getting into dimensional standards, we wanted to highlight some of the major changes on this. And they were all primarily, well, we'll say primarily to align with the housing needs assessment and housing action plan, in addition to what we've already talked about, trying to reduce our nonconformities. So we analyzed a large number of properties in GIS in the R2 and R3 zone districts to see what their existing lot sizes were, to try to see where we could reduce the lot size to make them conforming. So that's where we ended up reducing R1 from 7,000 square feet minimum lot size to 6,000. And R2 and 3, we went down to 4,000 square feet. There are a few R2 and R3 lots that are actually in the 5,000 range, so we kind of massaged the numbers and kind of contemplated where we might need to land on that. The advisory committee felt pretty confident with these numbers. We went over with them last night again. I will note that the density column, there are some changes coming in that. This is a new column that we've added, or new row that we've added. The RE, one unit per acre, seemed appropriate. The R1, 6 units per acre, seems appropriate, kind of matches the math. If you take a 6,000 square foot lot, you know, on an acre parcel, you can get about 6 units. Our R2 and R3 are a little low. If you kind of take into account the 4,000 square foot lots or the 2,500 square foot lots for townhomes, you actually can get more like 14 units per acre, 14 or 15 units per acre. So we're going to run some math and some scenarios on those and come up with some new density numbers that are consistent with what you would see currently in the city. So not trying to increase your current densities, but trying to match it with the numbers that we have so that they're consistent. So are there any questions on kind of that topic? All right. We did reduce a lot of setbacks, so you'll see the front yard setbacks have been reduced across the board. The intention of this is you would like, yeah, go ahead. Oh, I am so sorry.
Or zoom in.
I know, I can't read it either. Can we see it now, or do we need to zoom in more? Okay. So the front yard setbacks, you typically would like to have 20 feet to a garage so you can accommodate a vehicle in the driveway. But we've allowed for 15 feet for the front facade of the building, so that can be pushed out. Typically, a lot of the older buildings, you know, we all saw in the 50s and 60s, we call them snout houses where the garage sticks out in front of the house. This will hopefully encourage more homes where the front facade kind of pushes out a little in front of the garage, or will allow that option. And that can gain some additional square footage with all these new numbers that we've created. So hopefully that will help a little bit. Setbacks, side setbacks, we're at 7. We've reduced them mostly to 5 feet. As long as you have a 10-foot separation between buildings, you're fine for fire safety. So a lot of communities are reducing to 5 these days. Rear yard setbacks we kept primarily the same. They seemed pretty lenient already. We have increased the lot coverage numbers, and the reason for that is once you reduce that lot size and increase your setbacks, now you're covering more of the lot. So just trying to, you know, balance out the numbers. And the minimum lot width, same thing. We've reduced the minimum lot width to be consistent with those minimum lot sizes. So any questions on the dimensional standards? And we can go over the commercial ones next. Seem pretty good? Or is everybody's dinner settling in now and you're digesting? All right, for our commercial zone districts, same thing. We've added a density column to address anywhere that residential is allowed. I believe residential is also allowed in, I can't remember. There's another, one of the commercial zone districts we need to add a density to. We have removed, so there was a lot of, the commercial tables went on and on and on, and we've really condensed them down. There was language about minimum unit per lot kind of sizes, and we've tried to condense all of that into some new dimensions that are same dimensional standards, just kind of condense the language a little bit. We've changed these minimum lot sizes to match what we had for the residential districts. We've reduced setbacks again across the board and increased our maximum lot coverage. So any questions on that one?
I had a question about
Yeah.
the setbacks, the rear yard setbacks for neighborhood business. Those are mostly residential if you look at it, and I was wondering why the increase from 7 to 10. And a lot of I just thinking of where those are in the city, it would create a lot of non-conforming issues because there's a lot of garages and buildings that would already be inside that 10-foot zone.
Yeah, I think like 90% of that zone is actual residential.
Right. That's a good point. We can take that back. I'll take a look at that, but we can take it back to the existing number. I don't see any problem with that. Sometimes we have these discussions and it makes sense at the time, and then something like that gets pointed out. So thank you very much.
One of the other questions I had about that, one of
Yeah.
the discussions we had previously was about flexibility to match existing, to match, like, if there's a block with garages all the way, I don't know what the setback number would be, but if there's a line of garages, would then, if someone wants to build a new thing, can you match that line of garages on the alley, or do you now have to go further back?
Right. That's a good point. We can add that language in, and actually we need to probably add some language in here to accommodate for alley loaded. Although 15 feet to the front is probably about the closest you'd want to go anyway, so we might be okay in that one, but we can add some additional language on that.
Yeah, the alley
It's
stuff,
usually
the alley stuff is
averaging-
what I was thinking of.
Yeah, okay. Perfect.
But Robert brings up a good point, because I remember being on Board of Adjustment and Appeals, and someone wanted a carport, everyone else had one, but then
Okay.
now they weren't allowed, and it would have matched the neighborhood.
Okay. Good points. Thank you, guys.
Is there a way with that you generally do it? Like, is it like, oh, this block, 60% of the people have a structure out of compliance here or whatever, or it doesn't have to be out of compliance, so that someone wants to match, like, or is it, do you look at just the two people next to them, or like, what do you define as a neighborhood is what I'm trying to ask. Like, I think if we're going to do that, then we need to define what does that mean? The area, all of Cortez is my neighborhood, like.
We usually say on a block face, so, between two streets, that one block, and it's usually an average, like with setbacks, it's usually an averaging. So if most of them are pushed in front of that 15-foot, and maybe one is behind, you just look at an average, and you kind of create that line, and that's where they can build to. The carports is another situation. I might have to put a little bit more thought into that one and how that works. All right. We've added some graphics to try to describe these dimensional standards, and McKayla and I were looking at this, and we have the residential one. Now that we have the commercial dimensions kind of pinned down a little bit further, I think we'll create another one that has a little bit more of a commercial character, just to describe that. This could be used for both, but I think that will help kind of continuity. So the PUD standards, there's a provision at the beginning, and this is one of our questions for you guys. Maybe I'll switch over to that document if you don't mind, and I can kind of show you the language. Bear with me a second here. How can I get, there we go. This is all that language I was telling you guys about that we've removed, that just said the permitted uses in the R1, blah, 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 and we've just referencing the use table is the best way to do that. So that's why a lot of that language has been removed. Here we go. So there's some language here right at the beginning about sizes. And we have, usually a PUD doesn't spell out shopping center having a different size than an industrial park. It's supposed to be kind of a mixed use configuration. A lot of codes do have a minimum lot size to accommodate a PUD. But a lot of the situations that you've seen PUDs where they're adding that minimum lot size, it's in a larger community where they're seeing just tons of PUDs for people kind of trying to find a workaround. And so a lot of communities have established a very large number, like 100 acres, to do a PUD, to try to really encourage them to be done for that purpose. We've had a lot of discussion about PUDs in Cortez and how, maybe it's as small as half-acre or acre-sized lot, if someone wants to do a little cottage cluster or a tiny home community or a homeless community, something creative and innovative and that would kind of address some of our housing issues. So I think we want to kind of allow for some of these creative opportunities to happen as well. So one of the questions we have is, and you might not have the answer tonight, but as you're kind of thinking through and reading through the document, do we want to keep all these different kind of lot sizes for a PUD, or do we want to have a minimum lot size at all? And I don't know if anyone has any general thoughts on that right now, but that's just one thing we'd kind of like to look into a little bit deeper on this.
I guess I'm still trying to understand why someone would do a plan unit development. Is that if they have property and they want to subdivide it and have different zones in it, or like mixed uses?
Yeah, typically that's what it's used for. It's used for, say you have a parcel, I'm going to use, maybe you have 20 acres of land and you don't want it all to be the same. You might want some, maybe a little corner store and some apartments and some townhomes and some single family and a park or something. That's usually what PUDs are used for, to have that creativity of kind of flexibility within it. Yeah. But the intent of a PUD, and I will say this, is to not circumnavigate the code. It's, you're meeting the code and you're going above and beyond. You're providing some public benefit, or it's really typically more about the public benefit. So,
what have you seen in smaller communities with this?
Well, to be perfectly honestly, a lot of communities are getting rid of their PUD zoning. And then the ones that are don't, in a smaller community, they don't have typically a cap or a minimum lot size. So,
How would this impact development in existing PUDs?
You only have, I think, 2 or 3. One that I know of that's a residential PUD. And there's only a couple of others.
The hospital's the other one I was thinking
Yeah,
of.
the hospital, that's right. The hospital and Brandon's Gate are both PUDs.
Yeah.
It would not affect them at all. They're all quite a bit larger
Because they're existing
anyway.
agreements and...
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
I guess would it prevent spot zoning? Because instead of doing like every lot is a PUD zone, then you've
Yes.
got like 40 residential, 3 commercial.
Yes. That's exactly what it does, is it prevents spot zoning, and it prevents people from circumnavigating the code just because they can't get their development to fit. It really should be for a creative, innovative type situation. There was language in here that I think we removed that we could bring back in, which would allow you all to reduce that lot size for a development if you felt it warranted that. I would recommend we establish some criteria for that. So it's not just, well, does this fit or does this not, but, does it meet this criteria? Okay, then maybe we could reduce that lot size. So we could still establish a minimum lot size of, 5 acres or something, so you're trying to encourage that innovative development. but still leave in that stipulation that there is a clause that they could, you know, potentially do a PUD on a smaller lot if it's, you know, like any of those other innovative kind of concepts that you couldn't do under the current code. And you don't have to have a decision tonight, so you can kind of think on that.
Is that like over a certain lot size, you would be able to do a PUD? I don't know if exactly by right, but it's sort of in the code that you could go for a PUD. But let's say you had a much smaller lot, a half an acre, that you wanted to do something interesting with. You'd almost like petition and say, I want to do a PUD because of X, Y, and Z reasons.
Right.
That's kind of what you're
That's
suggesting?
kind of
right?
what, yeah,
Okay.
it would have to be.
Would we have to build that process, that petition process into the code, whatever that would look like?
We would,
Okay.
yes. And I think it could be very simple, but it would have to be built in.
Yeah, I would like there to be flexibility for more of these innovative ideas that you're mentioning, and particularly that could create more workforce and affordable housing. I'm curious what your guys' perspectives are on this.
Yeah, I actually like the idea of removing all the prescription stuff and preserving an ability to have a flexible zone, because we can't always think of everything in our current use table. I think twice I've talked to people about maybe doing a PUD here. One of them was sort of a homeless community where they wanted to do some weird little, some odd homes and have a common kitchen, and it was in the commercial zone, it just didn't fit. And of course, it's a use we need, and the comp plan supported it, so the ability to do a PUD on that property, I think it's important to leave that open. The other one was somebody who wanted to do housing, mixed uses, next to Safeway, where they could transition it all on one parcel, have some maybe work above, and it just didn't fit with our current zones, or any of our zones. I like them. I have worked in one community that seriously abused them, and everybody wanted to do a PUD because they just didn't want to use setbacks. They wanted small lot sizes. So definitely need to have some of that criteria for them.
I think if the PUD is in the use table, just having really clear, like, what's permitted and what's conditional, and that needs to come to us.
Yeah, I like that. All right. I'm going to switch back to the PowerPoint here. We can always come back to this guy. Why does it always go back to the beginning? Okay. The other major change we made in here was there was many pages of language on, and they were actually repetitive. It took me a couple passes through this to kind of piece it together, but speaking to dimensional standards, so your current code actually treats PUDs as an overlay district, which means you might have some underlying zoning. Let's use the example that Nancy was just talking about with maybe it's in the commercial district, but you want to do something unique, and so you're putting this overlay over the top, which a lot of communities do manage in that way. Your current PUDs are not done that way. They're just zoned PUDs, so there's no underlying zoning. And then the idea with that is you're supposed to allow the flexibility, but your current code has all these standards that say refer back to the underlying zone district for your dimensional standards. And so we all said, this is getting really confusing. I don't even know how the ones that have done it. So we've removed all of that language and said, you're establishing your own new standards with a PUD anyway. That's the whole intention of a PUD. You just need to meet these very minimum standards, like 10-foot building separation, need to meet your maximum building heights, because that's kind of a Cortez type thing, typical community type thing, you know, having your building height. And that you need to meet all the other development standards, parking, lighting, landscaping, and all of that. So we've simplified this tremendously to really allow that flexibility to happen. And we have very specific language in there that you have now that we've just emphasized, that the intent of these is to create that innovative, creative kind of development. So hopefully that will help moving forward, so that administering it on all levels. So any questions about that? We love taking confusing language out and simplifying it, so. Zone or use standards, like I said, we've taken your use table, and the biggest change would probably be within the residential section. Single-family home is, detached home is already in there. Duplexes are already in your code. Single-family attached is divided into 2 different categories, up to 6 units and 7 and more. And we actually had quite a conversation last night with our advisory committee to say, do we really need that break, or can we just call them single-family attached? So we're working on that right now. Manufactured homes are like what you consider your mobile homes, and so we've made sure that definition is reflective of HUD standards and everything for mobile homes. Apartments are very confusing in your current code and kind of cross over a couple different definitions and have made Nancy's life difficult on a number of occasions. So we've changed apartments to mixed-use dwelling. We've done this in a lot of other communities, and it's just the intention of apartments in your current code is it's the residential unit that's above or behind a commercial use in like the CBD. So now it's called mixed use, so it's mixed in. It could be mixed in with a commercial use. And then we've updated the definition of multifamily, which you would normally think of as an apartment complex kind of thing. So we've tried to kind of iron out some of those inconsistencies there. We've added a modular home that is distinctly different than a manufactured home. A modular home is something that's maybe built off-site and brought on-site in, a kit home or built-in pieces, or even built completely off-site and brought on-site, but is not on a chassis or anything like a mobile home. So built to the local building code standards. We've added tiny home and tiny house. A tiny home is your tiny home on wheels that you're familiar with. A tiny house is just a tiny house that's built to local building standards, but has some very similar similarities with a tiny home, but it is built on a permanent foundation. And
I assume all these will have definitions
Yep.
of, okay. Just off the bat, I see the tiny home and tiny house not permitted for neighborhood business. And I think the point of that zoning is to have a mix of residential and business, that gradation of the 2 districts, because that's kind of where it lays out in the map. And we allow every other housing, so I'm just assuming that permitted would make sense for those 2.
Okay.
Because if you're going to have a business, but then you want a tiny home to live in and run your business.
Yeah, good thought. Anyone else have any thoughts on that one?
I think that makes sense.
Okay, good. We did have a question mark next to the P on tiny house in the R2 zone district. You'll see R1 we've really tried to preserve in its kind of current state with a lot of these uses. R3 we tried to open up to pretty much every housing type because that's kind of what is there now, and it seemed like the most appropriate area to continue that pattern. R2 should be in between a little bit. So you do have some existing mobile home parks in R2, and we were just wondering if a tiny house or a tiny home were appropriate in R2. So that was kind of a question that we were kind of sitting on the fence with. Excuse me as I drink. I went down the wrong tube.
What were some of the, the reservations around it?
Did we really have any reservations? I don't think anyone's really expressed any concern about it.
I guess, what's the size of a tiny house versus the restrictions we have for an ADU? I think our minimum for an ADU was like 350 or?
Maximum?
Maximum.
850, yeah.
was the
But,
maximum.
I mean, because I guess it'd be like, we're allowing like a big house and a tiny house, but we're not allowing just the tiny house. So I think it should be permitted in R2.
Good, okay. All right, and then manufactured home park, your current code has manufactured home park and manufactured home subdivision, which were identical, so we just went with one over the other. The new use table has a column over to the side that we'll continue to fill out as we finish out final edits to the code. You're going to have clickable links over there to the sections where the definitions and standards are, so you can click back and forth a lot easier.
And the way you write that link will say what section it's in, so that someone
Yeah.
who's just reading it can
Yep,
jump
it'll
to
say
that.
section, blah, 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 and then it'll be clickable. So,
Awesome.
Yep.
I really like this updated table a lot because I think it reflects current trends and kind of the desires of people. So
Good.
kudos, it looks great.
Thank you. Let's see. The other thing we wanted to highlight on here was just where we have made changes. And like I said before, we've really added a lot of permitted uses, residential uses in the R3 in support of the Housing Action Plan and Housing Needs Assessment. And then a couple of additions in R2. R1 has been really preserved. And then there's a couple of changes in the C zone with regards to single-family attached. We are really trying to take a hard look at conditional uses and trying to reduce them. We haven't reduced very many. I think we've kept a lot of them, but just being cognizant of, you know, if it's really more of a check the box kind of thing that these conditional uses are coming to, then let's make them permitted. But like I said, we've really haven't changed very many conditional to permitted yet. So the use table takes many iterations. So we've kind of gone through a couple of iterations internally. Now it's out with you all. If you have any, you know, as you're reviewing it, if any of them you're like, this could be, you know, think through some scenarios and make notes, and we'll continue to kind of massage this. As far as new uses, we have added a number of new uses and kind of some new names for old uses. So farmer's market is a new use, portable storage container in a temporary kind of storage situation. Civic space and club or lodge, they're right now in your code kind of combined and, I don't want to say confusing, but they mix several uses, so we've kind of pulled them apart and have a civic use that's truly for more of a public type of use, and a club or lodge that's kind of your, maybe it's a youth organization or the Elks Club or some of those kind of fraternal and social organizations. Religious land use is a term that people are changing to instead of church or place of worship. It's much more inclusive of all types of religions. We've added a technical school in addition to the existing schools. We've replaced nursing home with long-term care facility. Again, that's a kind of a more modernized terminology. Transit station replaced bus station or terminal. Grocery store we've added, for clarification, outdoor theater. You had medical marijuana but not retail in the code, so we have to update that. And then we've added urban farm. So we've tried to add some newer uses. If there's anything that you, I mean, this code is supposed to take you into the next 20 years, and we can't obviously foresee some of those uses, but if there's anything that you know of that you think we need to be incorporating or and contemplating, please let us know.
Does urban farm include greenhouse operations? It feels like we had a pretty restrictive definition of greenhouses.
Yeah, and we've been toying with your greenhouse definition too. I think McKayla has it up right now. Urban farm?
We don't have any reference to greenhouses in the urban farm definition. That's something we could build into the use standards, which is a question that we do have right now.
Mm-hmm. So as you're reviewing the code, you'll see now in this new section, every single one of our uses are defined under the table, and a number of them have use standards associated with them. Some of those are from your existing code, a lot of them are new. So trying to kind of help define some of these. So we may want to look at that either in the definition or the standards of urban farm, to be clear. And we've also incorporated beekeeping and chickens into one of them, I think. Home garden. That was something that came up with our listening sessions at the beginning of the process. And a lot of communities are incorporating regulations on those. So, which I think you already regulate to 6 hens in your municipal code. So just kind of stating that it's an allowed use. And I think, are there any other questions on Chapter 3? Questions or?
I do have a question. Are you going to address ADUs separately, or would now be a good time?
Now would be a good time. We haven't really touched the ADU regulations because we knew they were fairly new. So if there's anything else we need to be addressing with this, we're happy to.
Okay, well, let me state my concern. If it's good, we'll address it. An ADU is a private home, converted multifamily dwelling, or other such similar land use, operated on a fee basis as a business by providing overnight lodging for a period of less than 30 days and providing a food service. Well, that's a bed and breakfast, but it seems like an ADU could fall under that heading. If I have an ADU and an innkeeper shall be in residence, I live in the main portion of it, I have an ADU which is supposed to be long-term rental. But if I want to have it for short-term rental, I've got a box of cheese and crackers out there and cans of coffee, I'm providing them food. Could then an ADU slip in and be a short-term rental?
Is that something we would address in the land use code, or a different process where we, require a business license or have that cap?
You just hit the nail on the head. So it can be part of the zoning code, or the land use code. A lot of communities have the business licensing aspect of short-term rentals in their municipal code, and then anything specifically related to land use in the land use code. I've seen them put it all in the land use code, depending on who's going to be administering those licenses. So if it ends up being the planning department that's administering the process and the licensure, then all of that would need to go in the land use code, or could go in the land use code. So that's where the ADUs would be addressed with regards to short-term rentals. I will say the advisory committee and staff have advised us to steer clear of short-term rentals at the moment, so that you guys can put some, have that as a separate discussion, so it could get rolled in to the ADUs during that conversation.
I would just hate to see us trying to do something to help with the housing shortage here for
Right.
long-term people and have a loophole where somebody could make it a short-term rental.
Right.
That's my concern.
Part of our concern was that when we were interviewing the consultants, and several of the applicants told us that the best way to get a land use code adopted is to try to avoid the really hot button issues. And I think the consensus at the committee level was that the short-term rental was kind of a hot button issue, and it's an issue that will take some significant thought and work in order to come up with regulations. And I guess our recommendation, if I can speak for the committee, was that perhaps that would be something we would tackle after hopefully adopting the new land use code.
Then I guess what I would recommend is just tighten up the definition of bed and breakfast. That's what I would say.
Good thoughts. All right. Anything else on Chapter 3? Where are we on time? We're doing good on time. We've got a little bit more time left if you guys have anything else we need to discuss. And I can kind of give you a highlight into Module 2 as well. So.
I guess I do have one other thing. It's under the section for home occupation, and it says, home occupied businesses shall not create noise between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. Seems like 6 a.m. is kind of early to create noise. If I'm in my home and someone's running a buzzsaw next door, trying to carve a bear or something, it seems like not create noise between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. I think those numbers should be reversed. Not create noise between 6 a.m. or I'm sorry, 6 p.m. and 8 a.m. It just seems like, well, I'm having dinner, I don't want to have the guy next door running a buzzsaw. That's...
Any other thoughts on that? I'm happy to change however.
I think 6 p.m. is too early, though. I mean,
Yeah.
in the summer, the sun doesn't set till 9, so.
I think 8 to 8 seems sufficient. Yeah.
And it does sort of go back, we just had a little sidebar about the kind of lack of a solid noise ordinance, right? Right? Okay, just so we all know.
Oh, I think my last question with Chapter 3 was, do we address like equestrian horses? Because I think that the property that is the legacy zoning that's privately owned, they have horses, and then the sheriff's office has horses, and I can't remember what that zoning is.
That's a good point. I don't recall seeing equestrian uses in your use table at all, so we can add that in.
Is that more of a municipal use as opposed to, or a municipal code as opposed to a zoning issue, though?
Where it comes in play in zoning is the stables, so you'll oftentimes see either commercial or private stables as a use that's allowed. So the horses and the keeping of horses and the animals should be in your municipal code, but
Gotcha.
the use of allowing a stable can go in the zoning.
Okay.
All right.
I did have one other question.
Yeah.
We have basically container, it's only allowed as temporary. We've had people approach about using it as a garage or using it as a building material as for a house. Is there any flexibility that we can build in there?
We absolutely could, and it's kind of up to you all if you would like to have some standards on that. We've danced around that in some other communities and even prepared some standards that would allow that for a building material.
I think that would be good to differentiate, because there's even like a company in Durango that makes container homes now, so.
And they've come a long way. I've seen some really cool container homes.
Well, and I think also just for permanent storage, there's businesses in other towns where they have zircons permanently,
Right. Yeah. Okay, cool.
I think that, I don't know that our code like if someone wanted to build a shed, I don't know that our code needs to be saying you can build it out of wood, but you can't have it pre-built out of metal, I guess is kind of what I'm advocating for there. Or if you wanted to use it as a building material to build an ADU or to build, I don't know, use 6 of them to build a home, I don't know that we need to be, our zoning needs to be limiting that.
Should the storage then not be focused on the container and like take those separate and define like a storage unit separately regardless of what it's built of?
I mean, I tend to think that gets addressed through your lot coverage and your setbacks. So I don't know that I don't know that I would even need to control it at all. But I think that you're controlling it. You're controlling lot coverage. Someone can't cover a lot with 10 containers because they'd be violating the setbacks and code issues that way.
So maybe we remove the temporary portable container.
And I mean,
I guess the other thing I have known people too that get those as temporary storage where they just have it moved, like they're moving, they put their stuff in it, then they bring it, put it in their front yard or whatever. Like, do we need to address that separately if that's, or is this not the right place? Like those pods?
yeah. I guess like I'm trying to think of, you would use it, would you control it more under the building code? Like if it's permanent, it has to have some kind of, I mean, whether it's on piers or whatever, or appropriate, you can't just like stick it on your yard to where it's now sinking into the ground and creating a problem, but you could use it as an actual utility, an actual like accessory use, but you would have to build it to a specific standard. I guess that's kind of what I'm anticipating. Like have a foundation of some sort. I don't know what exactly that would be required. I know that I guess I'm thinking is that in more modern building codes, it's becoming something that's contemplated, and I don't think it is in the building code that we currently use.
Yeah, I'll just kind of weigh in on that. Typically, an accessory structure, we can have some standards like that to say it needs to meet all your setback requirements and be placed on a concrete pad or a permanent pad kind of situation. One of the codes we wrote, they had temporary accessory structures and permanent accessory structures. So your temporary structure could be like a play set for children or something versus your shed or garage, which would be more permanent. And that's kind of how they defined that. So we could look into that, and then your portable, those pods would fall into the temporary category, which we could even, it just kind of depends on how far you want to go with those. You know, you could regulate those to only 90 days or whatnot, but then you get into issues where sometimes people need them for a year or two while they're remodeling their home. So there's pros and cons to all of those.
Did you guys address at all like camper type trailers? And I'm just thinking about like, I know that there's an ordinance against having one on the street for a period of time. It can't be more than X number of days, et cetera. But I think there are several places in town where people are actually living in a camper trailer, like right next door. So would that be considered like a tiny home or a tiny house, or is that could it be considered an ADU? Somebody, I'm just curious, like, it definitely is mobile, yeah.
There's a municipal ordinance against it right now. They're not supposed to do that in a yard, in the residential area.
I think it's like 2 weeks in a yard. Or 30 days? Okay.
30 days.
They know.
How do we judge that, whether it's lived in or not, I guess? Is it if it's connected to utility? I mean, if it's connected to electricity, it's connected to utilities, is that how we look at that?
Usually you look for the extension cord coming out of that. No, I'm kidding.
No, I think.
I mean, it is. But
Seriously. Yeah.
That's what we have. Our code enforcement are supposed to be enforcing that law. Mm-hmm. That's what they are supposed to be doing.
Okay, so then going back to the tiny house that's on wheels, is that permanent? Because what if you take one of these storage units and create a tiny house on wheels with it? Is it temporary? Is it permanent?
yeah. I'm looking to McKayla. Good questions. See, you can see how these use tables can take a long time to work through.
Sorry, I
Yeah,
just have to
Katrina.
jump in with the insurance information. Most companies won't insure a tiny home that's still on wheels unless it's tied down and skirted. They won't insure it.
Nancy, did you have something?
You know, the real thing we're trying to do is RVs aren't built for permanent living.
Right.
We don't want people, either are zircons, we don't want people living in things that aren't quality for them to live in, safe, you know? So I think that's what we're trying to get at, and their definition of tiny home on wheels now has a certification. There's a new state certification for tiny homes. So the idea is it's built for more permanent.
So, and I think the idea comes from Indie Dwell, which is based out of Pueblo, and they build homes out of storage units. So, I mean, somewhere in Colorado is allowing these, so I don't know
Right.
what kind of standards they meet, that it is actually livable.
Good. Any other thoughts on chapter 3? This has been some good discussion, good food for thought. All right, I'm going to give you guys just a quick breeze through of what to expect in module 2. We're going to dive into subdivision standards. A lot of that is just us kind of reading through, and we didn't get a ton of notes when we were doing the assessment on this, other than drainage needs to be addressed. public land dedication, I think I always want to, look at that in detail. And then adding two new sections at the end on subdivision improvement agreements and bonding or letters of credit. So we'll add some language on that. Other than that, probably just some cleanup unless there's anything that we, you never know. We start to unpack these and there might be some additional topics that we'll need to discuss further. Streets and alleys is another one. In the PUDs, there was language about, meeting certain street standards. So we're going to take a look in this section and see if we can't kind of tie those two together a little bit better. Chapter 5, the site development standards, which it deals with parking, sidewalks, fences, trees, a new lighting section, signs, and then the performance standards is the junk drawer of like nuisance standards. So we'll kind of run through those. I've looked at them already and it seems pretty standard, but any tweaks to that. And then developing a new historic preservation section. So this is what we're going to start working on here. While you guys are reviewing Module 1, we'll start kind of getting our heads into Module 2 to keep the process moving forward.
For the historic preservation section, I just wanted to remind you, I guess, because I'm the city council representative to the Historic Preservation Board, that whatever we do is required to be approved by the state because we're a certified local government. So we'll have to make sure that that gets approved.
Absolutely. And we're going to establish those roles a little bit better for you so that you can have some kind of teeth and some standing for that board.
When will module two be reviewed in this type of setting?
Yeah, so we have, that's okay. So module 1 right now, you guys have in hand in that Conveyo document. And since we're adopting it all at once, we don't have really a, end time on that. You can spend the next month reviewing that, placing comments in there. We'll keep kind of tabs on it and have staff kind of check in and see, if you feel pretty good about those, then we'll start incorporating them. We're starting to draft Module 2, so February, March, we'll be drafting and having advisory committee meetings on Module 2. So then I would imagine that will come back out your way sometime in the spring. We haven't quite pinned that down yet, so we'll kind of get through our drafting and talk about that. And then Module 3 will be on its tails. So. Any other questions?
I guess I'm curious, like, how we're going to communicate, like, out the benefits of, like, what's coming out of this new code, kind of, like, in advance of the adoption and all that stuff. I'm just curious, like, if there's a plan for that. That's more directed at you, Rachel.
I think we had another open house in the scope, at least one other open house, and well, we might have two. I'll have to look back into our agreement, but typically that last open house is to really describe the big picture changes and why, how this benefits the community.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I'm just thinking for the public's benefit then, can we somewhere on the planning and zoning page list all the meetings where we address the land use code, and then that way someone who's like, okay, I want to run through these meetings and see what they've been discussing knows which ones to go to?
We have that. We might need, we'll need to update it with the most recent meeting. But I have documents of what was discussed in each meeting.
Okay.
If there's something missing, please let us know. Make sure we got that.
Great.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for the great discussion. We'll keep massaging these documents until we all feel good about them.
All right, thank you so much for that in-depth presentation. I felt like we had really good discussion, and it's always nice to see the Planning and Zoning Board too. Okay, so we're going to move on the agenda, or do I need to give them time to clear out? Okay. All right, we're going to move on to B, the general council discussion. Does any council have a topic or an item or a question they want to bring up? Dennis? Okay. All right, then we'll adjourn this meeting and we'll start our regular meeting at 7:30 PM. Thank you.
But sometimes I'm like,